Hello, BAM. Some of you, anyway. My name's Emily. I'm from the employer brand team here at Booking, and I'm here to introduce a very good friend of mine and, ex-client, Afdhel Aziz, who's here all the way from California, who's made it via Malaysia, via Colombo today, in spite of the weather. So we're very pleased that he made it. I'm very excited. Afdhel's someone whose career I admire greatly. When I first met him, he was the marketing director of Absolut vodka, and he was my client. The first briefing that I received from Afdhel, he told me, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to send Lady Gaga into space. That's the kind of guy he is, big dreams and big ambitions. Gaga never did go interstellar, incidentally, but Afdhel did. He's found his purpose now in helping companies and individuals find theirs. He believes that doing good can actually be good for business. And it's a belief that he and I share, and it drives a lot of the work that my team and the communities team do as well. When employees start to choose purpose over paycheck, and customers start shopping their conscience, we can't ignore that we not only have to talk about what matters to them, we have to mean it as well. So here to tell us more about that is my friend Afdhel Aziz.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Yes, you can clap. Thank you so much for Emily for having me here today. Thank you, Booking.com. As mentioned, I did fly in from Sri Lanka about 2 hours ago. So excuse me if I'm a little bit jet lagged and all over the place. It's actually apropos of how I want to start talking about the topic for today, about business as a force for good. My journey actually began in Sri Lanka. So I was born in Sri Lanka, I grew up there. And raise your hands if you've been to Sri Lanka, anybody here? All right, quite a few. So it's a beautiful tropical island. And I was back there in 2004 for my brother's wedding. And it should have been a really joyous occasion, but I woke up on the morning of December 26th, 2004, and Sri Lanka looked like this, because it was the day that the Asian tsunami hit the country. I was in Colombo, I was safe from harm, but I woke up in a country where 30,000 of my fellow countrymen had just died. And like a lot of my fellow countrymen, I got involved in the relief operations in the days and weeks that followed, going to refugee camps, helping people get food and supplies. And at the end of that time, I left and I went back to London, where I was living at the time, and I quit my job and I went traveling for about 6 months. The experience really changed me. I was diagnosed with a particular form of post-traumatic stress disorder called survivor guilt. Why had I survived and 30,000 people hadn't? It really started to make me think about the work I was doing. I knew how to do advertising and marketing, but I didn't want my legacy to be that I just helped people buy more stuff. That didn't seem like it was enough. That was really the beginning of this journey to write this book, Good is the New Cool, over 4.5 years, and really start to think about a way to do marketing and business in a way that drove revenue, built brands, and had a social impact at the same time. So my writing partner and I, Bobby, took this journey to write this book, and this was our purpose when writing this book. We wanted to serve the world changers, innovators and provocateurs who want to use business and culture as a force for good. People like you in this room today. If you're here, that means you're curious about this topic and you're curious about how to apply it in your own work. The journey took us to write this book, which came out in October of 2016. It's become something of a cult favorite amongst people in this space. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons that we learned on the book and how you can maybe reapply it into your own work as well. So I'll first start by talking about what was happening around us that we noticed. And the first thing we noticed was some of the coolest brands on the planet were also the ones doing the most good. So whether you looked at Tesla in cars, or Warby Parker or Tom's in fashion, The Honest Company in CPG or Method, Ben & Jerry's in food or Kind bars, it was really interesting. All these brands were doing well by doing good, and they were entering the zeitgeist in a way that other brands were struggling to do as well. By the way, I'm going to make this presentation available to everybody as a Dropbox link, so you can just download it. So don't feel like you have to take pictures and take notes. This happens all the time. It's much easier if I just give it to you. By the way, this wasn't just happening in new startups. This is a page from Unilever's Sustainable Brands report. Over half of Unilever's growth was coming from brands which had sustainability at their core, purpose-driven brands. In fact, Keith Weed, the Unilever CMO, got on stage in Cannes and said, at Unilever, sustainability isn't a moral question, it's an economic question. And they're now actively looking for ways to drive more of this amongst more of their brands as well. The next thing we noticed was the architects of cool were becoming activists. So by architects of cool, we mean anybody who can shape pop culture, musicians, directors, athletes. And there was something really interesting going on where they were becoming engines of pop culture as well. So whether you look at people like Beyonce and Lady Gaga and LeBron James, this is Beyonce at the Super Bowl, using the massive pop culture occasion to talk about Black Lives Matter. This is Lady Gaga at the Oscars talking about sexual assault. This is Kendrick Lamar at the Grammys talking about Black Lives Matter and police brutality. This is Leonardo DiCaprio at the Oscars talking about environmental awareness. Basketball players, and pretty much when you tune into the NFL on a Sunday, this is what you're seeing. The biggest names in pop culture are helping to shape public opinion around social issues as well. We haven't seen this level of engagement since maybe the 60s. So that made us really want to explore this intersection point between commerce, culture, and conscience. We felt like there's a really powerful engine that you can put into place if you can marry these three forces and bring it to light in your business or your organization. So why is all this important? I call these the CFO slides. So if you need to present these to any financial people, these are the slides you should steal. Number one, social activism is a strong driver of brand strength. In fact, it's number two. Leading edge or cool is number one, but social activism is now number two. Number two, social responsibility builds wealth. So this is an analysis of the S&P 500. And when they looked at the brands and companies that were spending the most on sustainability, on making sure that they had fair, ethical approaches to business, they were outperforming the rest of the S&P by 26%, which is pretty incredible. The third wave is really around investors. And so this is a chart which sums up impact investing. So this is investments in companies that are actually declaring a social impact as well as profitability as well. To date, there's roughly around $40 billion and growing. And I don't know if any of you guys saw Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock's announcement earlier this week. So BlackRock is the single largest investor in the world. They have $6 trillion in funds. And Larry Fink said, if you're a company that we want to invest in, you need to show us how you're showing social impact as well as profitable returns as well. This is a game changer. There's something happening when you have major investors asking to see social impact as well as financial returns. This is a really sobering slide. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 company has shrunk from 67 years to 15 years. Companies are going extinct faster. Our thesis is that those companies that don't have a clear purpose and clearly show how they add value to society will go extinct. And the research backs that up as well. Consumers wouldn't care if 74% of brands just disappeared. So the existential challenge that brands have today is, how are you part of that 26% that they really care about, that they really don't want to see disappear as well? We drill down deeper into why this was happening. And there's really three reasons. We call them generational, spiritual, and technological. The generational one is really close to what Emily was talking about. Today, people have new expectations of the companies that they want to work for. 64% of millennials won't take a job if their employer doesn't have a strong CSR practice. 85% of Gen Z employees say that companies have an obligation, and I'll repeat that word, an obligation to help solve social problems. So if you want to future-proof yourself for the next 2 generations of talent, you have to make sure that you have a strong purpose and you show people how their work has meaning to the greater good. It's summed up in this quote from Elon Musk. Putting in long hours for a corporation is hard. Putting in long hours for a cause is easy. The next point here is to do with consumption. So there's a lot of data to show how people are increasingly looking to spend their money on products and services that have a social good. This to me sums it up. The global annual spending power of millennials is 2.5 trillion, and 95% of them say they would switch brands to one that supported a good cause in an authentic and meaningful manner. That's a huge opportunity for brands to do something that's really tangible and good. It's summed up in this great quote. Every time you spend money, you're casting a vote for the kind of world that you want to live in. And I think now, especially when so many consumers are feeling disenfranchised at the ballot box with things like Brexit and the US election, they are turning to the corporations in their lives to stand up for their values. And they're making sure those corporations hear loud and clear what they want those values to be as well. So, the next big trend that we spotted was technological disruption. And especially in the business that I'm in, marketing, we say that technology is disrupting advertising like it disrupted the music business. So do you guys remember what happened when Napster came along and completely disintegrated the whole architecture of how people consume music? That same thing is happening to the conventional advertising model. So I'll let you read one of my favorite headlines I saw last year. "82% of kids in Netflix-only households have no idea what TV commercials are. I know this, I have a 3-year-old son, and he gets mad at me when he has to watch regular TV. He's like, what is this? I don't want this." If you think the salvation then lies in digital, this is the global rise of ad blocking software. 275 million users and counting. In any country around the world, ad blocking software is usually in the top 10 of the iOS and Android app stores. This is not going away anytime soon. So we're having a situation where people don't want to see ads on their TV, they don't want to see ads on their laptop or phone. So as an industry in marketing, I ask, what are we doing making things that people don't want to see? And the converse of that is, how can we make things that actually people want to participate in? Content and experiences that they welcome into their lives. So it's really summed up to me in this quote: advertising is the new coal. And I apologize to anybody working in advertising here, but I loved it. It's I kind of like it, right? Like coal, it's almost like an 18th century industry that we need to find a new model for in the 21st century as well. The third thing which I want to talk about is this crisis of meaningfulness in marketing and amongst people who work in it. And certainly that was part of the reason my co-author and I started writing the book. But when we did the research, we found that we weren't alone. So this is a survey that Adobe did when they asked people to name the 4 least valuable professions to humanity. Advertising and marketing is at the top of that list. By the way, PR professional is in there as well, in case you work in PR. But here's the really interesting bit. The blue is regular consumers. The yellow is people who work in advertising and marketing. Double. So we were like, what's going on? Like, the people who even do this job don't feel like what they do is useful. It was summed up to me beautifully by my friend Jeff Benjamin, who's a really amazing creative in advertising. And he said he was watching the movie Deep Impact. Do you guys remember this movie? It's Morgan Freeman as the president. There's an asteroid hitting the Earth. And they've built this giant mountain shelter. And they're going to put the best minds on the planet into this shelter. They're putting in doctors and nurses and engineers and teachers to help preserve humanity for the future, right? And Jeff is watching it and going, I don't think they're putting any advertising people in there. It's like, And he's right. So he framed it beautifully. It's like, how do we do work that gets us into the mountain? That's really the challenge that we all have. All right, so who is creating the clean energy versions of this model? That's what we set out to find. These are the 21 people that we interviewed for the book. They came from brands, nonprofits, and culture creators as well. So people like Bobby Campbell, who manages Lady Gaga, people from The Honest Company, Warby Parker, Zappos, some of these companies doing really inspirational things. And we distilled it down to this model, which is really the heart of the book. It is our thesis as to how brands can make money and do good at the same time. And it's a 7-step model that I'm going to walk you through a few of the steps today as well. So it starts with knowing your purpose, knowing why you exist as a company. 2 is finding your allies, finding those other organizations with common purpose. 3 is thinking about people as citizens, not consumers. 4 is leading with the cool and baking in the good. 5 is don't advertise, solve problems. 6 is people are the new media. So there's a massive opportunity to leverage the power of social media and word of mouth. And 7, always make sure you back up the promise with the proof. Otherwise, you can come across as very inauthentic when you're trying to do this as well. So let me start with purpose. This is probably the most important part. And I'm going to do a talk tomorrow, actually, on personal purpose and how to find it in your work. But today I'm going to talk about brand purpose or corporate purpose. So the definition is the why you exist as an organization. The higher order reason for being a brand or a business beyond making a profit or driving shareholder value. The value in terms of employees, of everybody signed up to a common purpose is huge. I like to tell the story of this NASA janitor who President JFK saw when he was walking around NASA in the 60s. And he sees this guy mopping the floor. And he walks up to him and said, "Hi, sir, what do you do?" And the janitor kind of straightens up and says, "Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon." And it shows you what happens when you have a company with a clear purpose that everybody buys into. It helps people reframe the work that they do. And for brands, we think purpose is so important that we call it the 5th P. So you know the classical 4 Ps of marketing, which is product, price, place, promotion. Well, we say if you don't know why you exist as a company, how can you know the other 4 Ps? How can you know what product to create and what to price it as? So just to illustrate the point of what it means to have purpose, I'll give you a few examples of companies that I think do it really well. Tesla. Tesla is one of my favorites. To accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Wow. This is literally stenciled, by the way, on the wall of their factory in giant letters. So it's front and center. When you come to work, you can see it every day. Google, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. A little dry, but explains what Google does pretty well. Patagonia, I'm going to talk about this one in more detail. To use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. Pretty powerful. Adidas, through sport, we have the power to change lives. Simple, short, crisp, clean. And Citibank, enabling growth and progress. I'm going to talk to you about this project as well, the Citibank program. And finally, Airbnb. We help people belong anywhere. Like it? I feel like I just mentioned like an ex-boyfriend's name or something like that. Well, let's dive into Airbnb then. All right, come on. So the first principle, which I'm going to use Airbnb to illustrate, is this idea of think people as citizens, not consumers. So when you think about somebody as a consumer, all you're obsessed with is that transaction that you want them to do where you buy their product. But we think that if you think about people as citizens, it's a much more dynamic, broad, multidimensional conversation you can have with them, where you look at what really they're passionate about and find ways as a brand to help them achieve it. So I think Airbnb actually do a really good job of it. So remember, we help people to belong anywhere. This, I think, is a really good first step. This is the We Accept program, where they make everybody who signs up sign a non-discriminatory clause that says they won't discriminate against anybody who rents it out. But the one I really want to talk about is Airbnb Open Home. So hands up if you've heard of this initiative. Okay, just a few people. So last year they announced that they really wanted to work with their community and offer up homes free of charge to refugees and people displaced by crises. So the idea is very simple. You can offer up your home as a $0 listing, which means people can come and stay for no money. Only nonprofits can book that listing, so there's control over who actually gets allocated to it. But the remarkable thing is they launched with 6,000 homes, and they have committed to getting to, I believe, 300,000 homes by 2020. Now think about this. If you're somebody who really believes in the idea that everybody should belong everywhere, and you want to do something, and the company that you work with to rent out your home gives you this option, that's a pretty powerful way to bring that brand purpose to life. And this is, if you go onto their website, you can watch this video of one of their hosts who sums it up like this: the idea that we have the ability to help embrace them in this journey is amazing. They're helping their hosts find some purpose and meaning in their work as well. So I think it's a really great example of how a company can really find a way to use its platform, use its functionality, but come up with a really great social impact as well. The next one is don't advertise, solve problems. So, as I think I've made clear, I think there's more than enough advertising in the world today. So instead, we encourage brands to solve problems in people's lives. We say that brands should solve problems from the everyday to the epic. When you think about this space, when you think about social impact or CSR or sustainability, you really think about the epic problems of the world, right? You think about climate change and gender equality and things like that. But there's a huge opportunity for brands to solve everyday problems in people's lives. One of the best examples we found in the book was Citibank sponsoring the City Bike program. So for those of you who don't know the backstory, in 2008, Citibank was one of the most hated brands on the planet. They had taken the single largest bailout in the global financial crisis. In fact, a lot of people called them Shitty Bank. Especially in New York City, people did not like them. In 2011, the mayor's office of New York City came to them and said, hey, listen, we are looking for a partner to underwrite this new bike share scheme. It's $41 million over 6 years. It's a pretty heavy investment. And there was a small group of people within Citi who really thought about how this could turn around perceptions of their brand and help fulfill a problem in New York City, which was that there was no way to get around the city if you wanted to not use a subway or public transport or things like that as well. So to their credit, they signed up for it. And I'm going to play you a short video and talk about the results next.
Do I have any memorable bike experiences?
The day I got my membership fee in the mail, I was pretty excited. I was like, okay, with the new deal.
I love it when I get into sequences with the green lights on the street and how quick I was able to get to work.
Yesterday, actually, the metro was down, and I used the city bike to get home.
Yeah, I've been to New York a lot in my life in the business, and I never in my life thought I'd cycle down Fifth Avenue. That was really nice.
Recently, my boyfriend and I went and he met me here and we rode on the waterfront and we sat down and got ice cream, and it just was, I saw parts of the city that I'd never seen before.
We've been pretty much everywhere, up to Central Park, across Brooklyn Bridge, Soho.
It gives me a better sense of the connectivity of all the neighborhoods. I've lived here for 16 years, but you see things in patches because the subway connects you.
From my restaurant to my gym, there's no subway across town in this section.
Oops. Yeah, I won't play the whole video, but that's some of the people who enjoy Citibank every year in New York City. Hands up anyone who's ridden a Citi bike, or if you've seen them around New York City. They're everywhere, right? So the story with this, after they launched it, was pretty incredible. First of all, that $41 million was probably the greatest single media buy in the history of New York City because they are on every single street corner in Brooklyn and now increasingly in the Bronx. So their visibility is fantastic. They entered social media with such a large amount of buzz that people use city bike as a verb. Now when you ask somebody, how did you get here? They go, I city biked it. Think about how powerful that is for a brand to enter everyday dialogue like that. City's own internal polling showed that they had 18% jumps in City is a brand for me, City is a brand I trust. It really helped turn around people's perception of what they stood for around that purpose of enabling growth and progress. So they solved a problem for the people of New York. They created the 5th public transport system through a sponsorship. And I think the best thing of all, when we spoke to Alyssa Gray, who was the CMO, she said, people became personally involved. People used to come up to her in corridors and say, I want to work on this project with you because it makes me feel proud to come to this company and work on something that helps change the lives of people around me as well. So I think it's an excellent example of how a brand can solve a problem in a really compelling way as well. In fact, there's this moment we're in where there's a lot of money to be made by solving problems. This is a great quote from Peter Diamandis: the world's biggest problems are the world's biggest business opportunities. They are almost completely white spaces for brands and corporations to get into. And increasingly what we're seeing now is really an evolution from corporate social responsibility into what we call corporate social opportunity. It's how do you make money from solving a problem in a way that helps bring in more revenue to keep solving that problem, to partner with nonprofits who always struggle with their problem of fundraising and create this new model of conscious capitalism, of conscious commerce. Okay, the final principle I want to talk about is back up the promise with the proof. And we put this in there because we saw so many brands who were doing it badly. Pepsi and the Kendall Jenner ad, which some of you may have seen last year, was probably the greatest example of doing it badly. Pepsi had zero credibility in the civil rights space, and they wandered into this space and did a shiny, happy ad with Kendall Jenner of all people, that paragon of civil rights. And people were like, what is going on here? And they were mercilessly attacked on social media. And so when we talk to brands and companies and we advise and consult with them, we say, think about this like a bank account. You have to have money in your bank account before you write a check against it. So you have to make sure you're doing things in this space to build up your equity before you start drawing checks against it. A brand who's been doing a terrific job for a long time of building up their bank account is Patagonia. So Patagonia was founded with this purpose, to use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. 2 years ago, you saw them literally putting their money where their mouth is. So on Black Friday, which is the biggest shopping day of the year in the US retail calendar, they donated $10 million, all of their earnings from their stores, to small grassroots environmental charities as a sign of their commitment to this as well. I'm going to play you their first TV ad and talk about what happened next.
I can be a pretty cynical guy. The one thing that really keeps me going are these wild places that are the real soul of this country. A great part of my life, I've been climbing and fishing and hunting on public lands. I've been a successful businessman because of the lessons I learned in the outdoors. My business was built on having wild places. Public lands have never been more threatened than right now because you have a few self-serving politicians who want to sell them off and make money. Behind the politicians are the energy companies and the big corporations that want to use up those natural resources. It's just greed. This belongs to us. This belongs to all of the people in America. It's our heritage. I hope my kids and grandkids will have the same experiences that I had. Our Secretary of the Interior is thinking, has said he believes in public lands. Let's hold him to it. Let's not let him back down on that.
So that was the very first TV ad that Patagonia ever did, and in it they had the founder calling out the US government, which is pretty ballsy of them. And in fact, if you went to Patagonia's website, it had this campaign of how you can contact your congressman and kind of show your support for this as well. So as some of you may have been aware, this whole campaign was around certain US public lands being returned to the state government. And despite their best efforts, it did happen. President Trump signed legislation which put it back into state lands, which meant that they were much more open to being exploited by mining and timber companies. And so Patagonia took out a full-page ad in the New York Times which said this: "The president stole your land, and they are now suing Donald Trump for taking that decision." Think about that for a second. This is a private corporation that is suing the president of the United States on behalf of people who are affected by this decision. This is unprecedented in corporate activism as well. Now, Patagonia may have lost some customers because of it, but I guarantee you when we look at their Christmas numbers, they're going to have a record month, because Patagonia just suddenly became the gift of choice for all of those people who really believe in it. And if you think about their business, it relies on having access to the outdoors. If you didn't have access to the outdoors, why would you need to buy a Patagonia jacket in the first place? So to me, it's a great example of a company that lives up to its purpose to use business to implement solutions to the environmental crisis. And I can't wait to see what they do next. They're so inspiring as a company. So, some final thoughts. This is my beautiful Sri Lanka, looking great now, so many years after the tsunami. In fact, I'm flying back there tomorrow to see my wife and son, and I highly encourage you guys to visit. It's really gotten back on its feet now, and it really helped me think about that question I had, which is what I was there to do, and it's really to do this. It's to go around the world and help people find ways to do their jobs in ways that are good for society and which help bring meaningful interactions to their lives as well. So if you're thinking about going on that same journey, some final thoughts for you. This is a moment to think transformational, not transactional. The world has some pretty big problems right now. So it's time to really step into the moment and use the gift of this moment where your consumers, your employees, and your investors all want the corporations in their lives to do some good. If you think about scale, this should be an eye-opener for you. At least in the US, corporations have more resources than the government. This is revenue by stakeholder, Professor Michael Porter. Nonprofits, 1.2 trillion, government, 3.1 trillion, corporations, 20.1 trillion. You guys all work for a corporation. By extension, there's a lot of power in this room, should you choose to use it, and use it wisely. We're living in a golden moment where really, right now, your values drive your value, both on a personal basis and also on a corporate level as well. So I'm going to end with the quote that we asked every interviewee in the book. It's really, to me, the one that sums it all up. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. I hope today gets you a little step closer to being onboarded. I hope today gets you a little bit closer to doing work that gets us into the mountain, and one step closer to the day you find out why. Thank you.